Welcome to Solutions for the Mind, the official podcast by the AFSFH. My name is Emma Norton and I am your host today. On this podcast, we're going to be bringing you lots of useful information about your mind. And today's episode, we are looking specifically at anxiety.
This is Solutions for the Mind from the Association for Solution Focused Hypnotherapy.
We're talking to Brian Noon today, who is not only a Solution Focused Hypnotherapist, but is also a senior lecturer, so trains new students who are qualifying to become hypnotherapists, but he's also the CEO of the association. He has a wealth of knowledge and understanding working with clients who are dealing with anxiety and also helping to train future hypnotherapists to help deal with anxiety. And he has his own clinic based in Lincolnshire. The kind of things that we're going to be looking at in this episode are who gets anxiety and why, what it could look like for you, and some really easy, simple things that you can do if you are currently struggling with anxiety. Now, I'm sure you're going to find all of this information so useful. And even if you're listening on behalf of somebody that you love, there's going to be things that you can absolutely take away from this episode and start applying straight away. I'd like to welcome Brian. It's great to have you with us today, and I'm so excited that we can get to discuss all things anxiety with you.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Something that I think would be quite useful to understand is why somebody might be looking for support with anxiety. What kind of things might be showing up for them?
Well, anxiety, when I work with it in my practice here in my therapy room, it can come in many forms. The most common really is probably generalized anxiety disorder, which is what I see people for predominantly. And that's where worrying kind of goes beyond the everyday stuff that you might worry about. You and I might kind of have the odd thing that plays on our mind a little bit. But with generalized anxiety disorder, a person might find themselves worrying about things consistently and ruminating and playing over and over in their mind. But also they'll be doing that a lot of their time. It'll be dominating a lot of their thoughts. Whereas we might have a worry for a minute or two, and we'll kind of go, oh yeah, I really must deal with that. Somebody with generalized anxiety disorder, it will ruminate, it will play around and around and around, and often they really struggle to shake those worries off. The other thing, of course, about anxiety is anxiety will play those worries and those fears out to the nth degree. So whereas we might worry about something that is imminent, and we might go, oh, we've got this bill that we need to pay, or we must remember to cancel that subscription for that thing, and that plays on our mind until we've done that. Somebody with anxiety might start worrying about things that are really unlikely to happen. I mean, it's possible, but it's kind of 0.001% likely to happen. And again, what will happen there is they'll play that over and over again in their mind, and it will feel as if it's happening to them in the moment. Their body will react as if it's happening as well. Their heartbeat will start to pound. They might start to sweat. Their breathing will become shallow, and it can really dominate people's lives. Some people I see still manage to kind of function in day-to-day life, but they kind of battle through the anxiety. And some people I see, it really just completely closes their life down. They can't work anymore. They can't hold down relationships anymore. Friendships are almost impossible because every message that they send, they then go, oh, have I said the right thing? What if somebody thinks, reads it this way or that way? What if I've misread or misunderstood the message? And it can really dominate your life. And it can really kind of hold you back from being able to do the things that kind of bring pleasure and joy to your life in many ways.
So anxiety is different to just general stress then. How would you describe the difference between the two? Because you've explained anxiety really nicely. So what's stress?
Well, stress can be useful a little bit. There's two types of stress. Stress in small quantities, in short bursts, is called challenge stress. And stress helps us to get something done. If you've got a deadline for this podcast to be edited and put out, and you're like, right, this has to be done tomorrow, you will get a burst of adrenaline and cortisol, and it will help you to focus and help you to get the job done and knuckle down. Even if your natural disposition is to procrastinate over things, when the timeline is there and you've got to get it done, it will get you through that task. And we've all had this when we were younger and we were studying, for example, and we got to the day before the exam and we had to cram that revision. And for most of us, we would have got enough stress and enough cortisol to go, right, I've got to knuckle down now. I've got to pay attention. And you got on with the job, even if you've been putting it off. Now, that's challenge stress. That's also adaptive from our sort of cave person era, where if we was out hunting and gathering and there was a wild beast that appeared out of nowhere, challenge stress gave us the moment to be able to go, right, okay, we can deal with this. We've got to get out of this situation. And that was really helpful. But the other type of stress that we have is called threat stress. And threat stress is when we have a huge amount of adrenaline and cortisol. It's uncapped amount of stress hormones that gets flooded into the body. And that's when we stop being able to kind of focus and we go into the shutdown state. We go into fight, flight, or freeze mode in that situation. And that's when it becomes unhelpful, because that's when we kind of withdraw from the situation. And rather than it making us focus and perform our best, athletes are a great example of challenge stress. It gives them the edge. It makes them focus. It helps them knuckle down. If that tips over, and sometimes I work with people with anxiety for performance and they come to see me, I work with a lot of kickboxers and they start to get really anxious about their fight. So instead of being in challenge stress where like, I'm going to go into this fight, I'm going to be really strong and I'm going to be really focused and sharp, they will start to go, yeah, but what if I get hurt? What if somebody else hits me and it really does me damage? And so their anxiety goes up and they start worrying about the fight before the fight happens. And then they get in the ring and they go into fight or flight and they withdraw and they can't perform at their best. The other type of stress that can be really problematic is chronic stress. And this is one that doesn't get talked about anywhere near enough. Often I'll see people in my practice and they'll go, well, they're really struggling with anxiety. And they go, but I'm not really stressed. But when we talk to each other, actually what comes out is they're not stressed as in they're raging stressed and they're like, oh, my tension in my body is constantly there and I can't really focus and I feel constantly on edge, although sometimes that is the case. What they tend to be is just a general underlying buzz of stress. And stress is helpful, as I said, in short bursts to help us deal with a specific situation. But the life that many of us live now is constantly from one task to another, to another, to another, to another. And what that means is that we're always busy. And because we're always busy, that cortisol tap, that stress hormone never really turns off. And it's not enough to make you feel really what you might think of the caricature of someone who's stressed, you know, the veins popping, the tensions, their fists clenched. But it's just that general buzz. And again, that's really unhelpful because that can compromise the immune system. It can go under the radar of being stressed, but absolutely it's unhelpful for us. So short bursts of stress is brilliant. Long bursts over a long period of time, not so good.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you mentioned the word high functioning earlier. So that's kind of where somebody who is chronically stressed will just get on and be able to do what they need to do in life. And that makes it hard for them to understand that that's the problem. You touched on a few of the reasons why people are anxious and stressed at the minute. But in your opinion, what causes this stress then? Is it the day-to-day things? Is it bigger things? Is it a combination of lots of these different things?
Yeah, well, it can be many different things. Genetics can play a part in this and our sort of disposition to stress or anxiety. But also it's the events that are happening in our world, but predominantly the way that we see those events. You can look at having challenges in your life, and you can have lots of pressures in your life, if you will. You can have people in high performance, high pressure jobs who thrive on that. And the chances are what's happening there is they're seeing this as I get to do this, as opposed to this is put on me. So the way that we perceive a situation will dramatically change how much stress and cortisol and adrenaline, those stress hormones, get flooded into the body. If we see a situation as it's a privilege or it's fun or exciting or it's a challenge, then we'll cope with it so much better than if we think, I've got this assignment to do and I've got this project and it's going to be hell on earth and I'll never get through it. And actually, I'm not good enough to do this and I'm going to get found out about it. You can see how the brain is going to interpret that same situation completely different. On this hand, it goes, I get to do this. I get to, I don't know, you seem really confident in doing this podcast, but let's say you weren't, for argument's sake, You go, oh, I have to do this podcast and I've got to put myself out there. And, what if I'm not very good? What if I ask the wrong questions? You can imagine how your stress levels turning up today might be very different to if you go, I'm really excited about doing this podcast. And I get to talk to some interesting people and
Yeah.
I get to find out some really cool things about anxiety and mental health. And I get to share with the wider community all of these things. So the same situation seen through two different frames will ultimately change the way that the body responds to it. But the more we see things negatively, the more it piles up. And the more it piles up, we say it stores in the stress bucket. In Solution Focused Hypnotherapy, we often talk about stress buckets, and every negative thought that we have is a deposit into our stress bucket. Now, we don't literally have a bucket inside of us, obviously, but we have an amount of stress that we can carry with us and we're okay. And you and I and everybody else will always have some stresses going on. A little bit's okay. But if we constantly are having negative thoughts, as somebody with anxiety typically does, then that starts to build up in that stress bucket. And that same anxious negative thought of 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 times, each time it's a new deposit in that stress bucket. And the more that fills up, the more we lose access to our rational mind, where we can see things for what they are. We can see it as a challenge. And what happens then is we go down into our lower part of our brain, the part that we call our primitive mind. And that is our survival brain. And that always goes to the worst case scenario. And that perpetuates that anxiety loop more and more. And we go, well, yeah, well, that could be really bad. What else should go wrong? And then we go, well, that could go on. That'd be really bad if that happened, wouldn't it? Oh, gosh, I hope that doesn't happen. And then we start worrying about that and we just start snowballing in a downward motion until the anxiety completely consumes us.
So it's the negative thinking that creates this feeling of anxiety when it builds up over time. And some people find that they are thinking more negatively than others. Why is that then? Why do some people feel that they think more negatively than other people?
There's multiple factors, and you say it can build up over time. Of course, anxiety can come very quickly as well. So certainly with something like a phobia or a social phobia, it can come up very quickly. There's a mixture of our behavior templates and beliefs that we have stored in something called our hippocampus. Again, that's in the lower part of the brain, the primitive brain or the limbic system. So that will shape the way that we respond to certain situations. And of course, we've built up those beliefs and templates over years and years of our lifetime. Often when I see people for spider phobias, for example, 9 times out of 10, one of their parents has a spider phobia. And what's happened is, if you think about it, it makes sense that if you're 3, 4, 5 years old, you go, well, that's that big. It's tiny. It's like a couple of centimeters tall. You go, well, that's nothing to worry about. But if you see your protector start having a panic attack and start jumping on the sofa and screaming, then to your little mind as a 3 or 4-year-old, you go, well, that must be terrifying. That must be really dangerous. And so you saw the template in there that that's something that's really to be afraid of. But the other thing, that's very true of things like phobias or things that we develop severe fears over. But of course, we probably had times in our life, mental health fluctuates in our life, doesn't it? We have times when we're feeling in really positive mental health. And sometimes we feel like we're not in such a good place. Sometimes it's just kind of, we're feeling a bit, today. And sometimes it goes as far as to have a mental health problem, a diagnosable problem. And so again, as that stress bucket fills up, that makes us more prone to negativity, to see things from the worst case scenario. And so we can then get trapped in that cycle of negative thinking. And that can be because we find ourselves in a difficult situation. Perhaps we've had a new boss start at work and we really like the old boss and we had a great relationship with the old boss and it felt safe being at work. But this new boss has come in and she's not so nice. She's quite confrontational and really demanding and pulling in a different direction to what you're used to. And so we can then start to see how we've been thrown out of our comfort zone. And that's going to trigger our primitive mind, in particular a part called the amygdala, which is like our safety radar. And in doing so, we're going to become more on red alert. Now, if you're going into work 5 days a week and you're spending 8 hours a day at work, your brain's going, a lot of your waking hours are in danger zone. So therefore, we become more prone to anxiety. We become more prone to negative thinking. It fills up the bucket and it gets worse and worse and worse. If you imagine it as being like an anxiety balloon, eventually it's going to blow up and eventually it's going to pop. And when that pops, that's when our mental health comes crashing down through the floor. And that's when someone like a solution focused hypnotherapist might be someone you'd reach out to try and get some help.
From what you're saying, everybody will go through periods of life where we experience some levels of anxiety, but dependent on lots of different factors that can start to build up and get to a point where people don't know how to then manage that, and it can create this negative cycle. So if somebody found themselves in that place, what is your advice then on the best ways that they would be able to kind of manage that anxiety?
Well, there's a few different ways that someone can help to manage that anxiety. I'll give you a few sort of techniques that everyone can do, and it's really nice classes to just kind of bring the anxiety under control. But one of the most important things, really, in the long term, is actually um, things that provide an antidote to the anxiety hormones, stress and adrenaline, cortisol hormones, are the positive neurotransmitters like serotonin, oxytocin, positive dopamine. That's where we've done something that helps us to feel like we've made achievements, and endorphins. As solution focused hypnotherapists, we often talk about the 3Ps, and they are positive actions, which is basically anything that gives you a sense of achievement. Exercise would be a brilliant positive action to do. And exercise, we know, burns off some of those adrenaline hormones and calms our nervous system. It gives us endorphins, which makes us feel good as well. And actually, exercise has been shown to be as good for our mental health in research as taking antidepressants. So it really is a wonder drug for our well-being. Achieving tasks, exercise. The next one of the 3Ps is positive interactions. Now, even though the world has kind of made us a little bit more isolated because we're all living in the online world now, and that's great because it allows you and I to have these conversations. But often we find our interactions now through social media, which is in quick bites, watching a quick video or seeing a reel of somebody doing something amazing that we're not doing. That's not really a proper positive interaction. Positive interaction is where, we're having a conversation, even if it's virtual, we're having a conversation, we can see each other. But, if we're in the room with somebody that we like and we feel connected and we feel safe with, that's going to lower our safety radar as well. That's going to bring our amygdala back under control and help us feel more secure. And that's a basic human need. We need to have that. Now, some people will need to have more of those than others. You might be watching this video or listening to this podcast and going, I don't like socializing all that much. That might be a social anxiety, or it might just be your nature. You're more introvert. That's okay. But we still need to have a tribe, even if that's a small bubble of tribe, people that we can lean on if times get tough. And people that we can talk to if we're struggling with our mental health as well. That's really important too. So positive actions, positive interactions. And the third one is positive thoughts. Now, positive thoughts isn't about just going, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. That sort of toxic positivity. And there is something to be said for affirmations, which is what they are, but that's not really what I mean by positive thoughts. When somebody's struggling with anxiety, what tends to happen is they get tunnel vision and they have, if you imagine the shutters that come up either side of your face. So all you can see is immediately what's in front of you. And with that, what tends to happen is the brain will prioritize what it thinks is most important for our survival. And so we have something called our reticular activating system, which is basically our focus, the things that our brain pays attention to. And when we've got that tunnel vision up, the brain will only pay attention to the bad stuff. It'll go, what are the things that could cause danger for me today? Or what are the things that could have been life-threatening for me today? And it'll discard all those little things that have been actually really quite positive and really quite joyous for you. The problem with that, of course, is that you get to the end of the day and you go, today has been horrific. Today's been really dangerous. And actually, I can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Tomorrow looks like it's going to be just as bad because all you're seeing is the bad stuff that's happening. And the metaphor I often use with my clients in my practice when they're struggling with anxiety is it's like, imagine you're going out for a walk down the river. There's a river just a couple of minutes away from where I practice. And you're seeing the ducks swimming in the river and it's really nice and it's really peaceful. And along comes a big polar bear with blood all over its snout and all over its claws. And, you think, oh, that must have escaped from the local zoo or something. In that situation, you're not going to go blood on its snout, blood on its claws. He's clearly already had a horse from the field or a duck from the pond or something like that. He's not going to be interested in little old me. In that situation, your anxiety is going to go through the roof. Your heartbeat would start pounding. You get pumped full of stress hormones, and you would be out of there in no time at all. And in that situation, that would be brilliant. The other thing you would do is if you hadn't already got that tunnel vision there, the ducks, the river, the nature are relevant. You don't need to pay attention to that when there's a big bear that's ready to pounce on you. You don't want to pay attention to that stuff. Positive thoughts is about providing a bit of balance to the seesaw and opening up those shutters so that you can go, okay, right now I've got some things that are worrying me, and I've also got these good things that are going on in my day. So what I would always get my clients to do, the people that I help with anxiety, is to, at the end of each day, jot down 3 to 5 things that you've been pleased about that day that have been good for you. And they can be really, really microscopically small, because sometimes that's where we need to start. It can just be, do you know what? I had a cup of tea and I sat out in the garden today and there was some birds in the bush tweeting. It can be small as that. Equally, if you do something amazing that's really good, great, that goes on the list. But what you start to do then is start to edge that tunnel vision out, those shutters out, so that you can start to see a more wide view of the world and a more balanced view of the world. And when we notice the good stuff, that produces those feel-good hormones, which acts as a counterbalance to that amygdala, which is the safety radar, which is hypervigilant when we're struggling with anxiety. So positive actions, positive interactions, and positive thoughts. Definitely, if you can balance those out a bit more, that's going to really help you move towards being in a more positive mental health space. Would you like me to give you some quick fixes as well?
Yeah, if you've got quick fixes, that'd be great.
Many people might have come across these because they're quite well talked about now, but they are really, really helpful for bringing anxiety under control in the moment. And you can go on Google and search for anxiety breathing activities and you'll get loads of them, but I'll give a couple here. The first one is called 7 breathing. And what you do is you breathe in through the nose to the count of 7, and then through pursed lips, slowly breathe out to the count of 11. So what you're doing is that outward breath. So you breathe in, you hold for a moment. What that does on that hold and that slow outward breath is it puts you into something called your parasympathetic nervous system. And what the parasympathetic nervous system is your rest, digest, and recover nervous system. So when you're in that, your body is calmed down. It goes into a more harmonious state. The opposite of the parasympathetic is called the sympathetic, which I always think is really badly named because it's not very sympathetic to the situation. What that does is that gets you fight or flight. That gets you ready to run away from the situation or deal with that confrontation that's about to be here. And so slowing your breathing down by taking nice deep breaths and that pause and that slow outward breath, that helps to put you in your parasympathetic nervous system. My favorite of all of these techniques is another breathing exercise. It's working on the same principle, but adds another layer to it, or another couple of layers. It's called 5-finger breathing. The first one is a bit more subtle. So if you're in a group full of people and you need to just breathe and calm yourself down, let's say you've got social anxiety, you can do that without it being too obvious. Even if you just kind of breathe through your mouth, but you just breathe it out, release it really slowly. Most people probably won't notice you do that. This one's a bit more obvious that you're doing it, but it's really a beautiful technique because it adds some extra layers to the breathing activity you've just done. So it follows a very similar principle, but what you do is you get your index finger on one of your hands, and then you get your other hand and you spread it out almost like you're kind of holding up your 5 fingers. And you place your index finger at the base of the thumb. And again, you're going to do a similar breathing activity. But as you do it, I want you to notice the tickle sensation as you kind of stroke the finger against the thumb and then subsequently the other fingers. We're going to do all 5 fingers. And if you're listening along to this, watching along to this, have a go at this at the moment because you'll start to notice how you feel more relaxed, you feel calmer by the time you've done this for the 5th time. So you've got your 5 fingers spread, your index finger at the base of your thumb right now. And on that inward breath, just slowly breathe in through the nose. And as you do so, notice that tickle sensation against your thumb. And then just pause that finger at the top of the thumb for a moment, hold that breath. and then slowly through pursed lips, even slower than you stroked it up, bring that finger down the other side of the thumb, slowly breathing out, noticing that tickle as you do so. Pause it at the bottom, and then you'll breathe in on the upward stroke of the next finger. Notice that tickle sensation as you do so. That's it. And pause there. And then again, slowly breathe out as you go down the next finger. Now, you do that with all 5 fingers. I'm not going to do that for the purpose of the video, but even just doing that there, I could see you relaxing, Emma. What's happening is the same thing that we just talked about with the other breathing technique, where this one I think is really magic, is that it focuses your attention on those fingers and the sensations of those fingers, which takes your brain away from the focus of the thing that you're anxious over. So it's kind of grounding you in the moment. But the other thing it's doing is, because of that tickle sensation, it's creating a release of oxytocin, which again is one of the antidotes to that overactive amygdala, the safety radar of the brain. And again, it goes, oh, if you've got that nice flow of oxytocin, we're feeling connected, we're feeling calm, we're feeling more relaxed. The amygdala, the health and safety officer of the brain, can go and take a coffee break now, get out of the way, and allow you to kind of reset down and come back to a nice state of calmness. So those 2 breathing exercises are my go-to. As with all of these techniques, it's trial and error. Find the ones that work best for you. But hopefully, if you're watching this, if you're listening to this podcast, you just had a lovely experience doing that. And hopefully one of those techniques is going to be really helpful for you.
Excellent. That's great. So as we were just saying earlier, so stress isn't bad. Too much of it is bad. So if we can start to get our nervous system, our bodies to be a bit more relaxed by doing some of these techniques, that's going to help what you were saying about reducing some of that adrenaline and cortisol that we've got in our bodies. And it's also going to release some of the more positive neurotransmitters that we want to have. So the key isn't to kind of eliminate all stress and all anxiety. We don't want to do that. We just want to find ways that our body and our mind can balance it, like you said, through positive thinking, positive actions and interactions, and all of the things that we just looked at there with the different breathing techniques is going to help us to do that. So that's great. If somebody wants to kind of do some of that on their own, experiment with some of those things that you mentioned with the gratitude. What would you suggest in terms of if they're struggling with that then? Do you think that there's always a benefit to kind of going and having therapy and having somebody else? And what is that benefit?
It's one of those things where we can even know some of this information, but sometimes it's really hard to do it for yourself. Even I look after lots and lots of other hypnotherapists as students. So I train hypnotherapists and I have supervisees that I kind of look after as well. And I say to them, your stress buckets can get full and you know how to be in good mental health. But even then, sometimes life happens. They're going through a difficult patch in their life. They're having challenges with their children, or they're going through a divorce or something like that. I say, reach out and get some help, because sometimes we can't manage by ourselves. Sometimes we need something to kick that on. And I often say to my supervisees, one of the best things that you can do that shows a real faith in what you do is to go and get some solution focused hypnotherapy yourself. Because if you're struggling and you go and get some help of how you help other people, that shows that you know it works. I'm super, super passionate about solution focused hypnotherapy, as you might guess from what I do. But what I really love about solution focused hypnotherapy is that it's very much a case of taking you from where you're at. The stress bucket's full now and you find yourself in a hole of anxiety. The great thing about solution focused hypnotherapy is we don't need to go back into the past to find out what it was that made you fall into that hole. Actually, in our work, we're much more interested in it's much more pragmatic, in the sense that we go, okay, you're in a hole of anxiety right now, or depression, or whatever your mental health challenge is. How do we get you out of that hole? And then how do we build resilience on the other side so that you're not going to be falling into holes of anxiety in the future? How do we teach you to create positive mental health, but also rewire the brain? Because the brain has something called neuroplasticity that means it can reconnect the ways that it thinks. So rewire the brain in a way that enables you to cope so much better when you face with challenges in the future. Because as you said, Emma, you're right. We can't eliminate everything that would create anxiety. In fact, it would be really boring. Our brain would create things to be anxious about if we had no challenges in our life. We just want to have a better quality of challenge, and a challenge that we feel that we can overcome. It's not about having nothing in the stress bucket, but we want to take the stuff out that doesn't need to be in there. And we want to stop putting that stuff that doesn't need to be in there. into the bucket and kind of put a lid on it a little bit and then choose deliberately, okay, that does belong in the stress bucket. And we can cope with that. We can deal with that. We'll find a way through it. And a solution focused hypnotherapist will very much guide you through that process because it can be quite hard to do by yourself. And over the space of 6, 10, 8, 12, usually sessions, sometimes it's more than that, a solution focused hypnotherapist will help you find that way back to kind of having positive mental health and kind of being the best version of yourself, really.
Because you mentioned about that connection side of things as well, and I suppose it's even just finding that connection of somebody who can help you and support you and feel supported is going to help us to feel better in itself as well. So if somebody was reluctant about going to hypnotherapy and they might have heard some kind of misinformation or have some misconceptions about what's involved, what would you like them to know about having hypnotherapy?
Well, I think there's a few things, particularly with solution focused hypnotherapy, is we're sort of very much evidence based that guides our way that we work. So we have lots of research, and there's lots of research being done into the efficacy of solution focused hypnotherapy. But there's always some peer reviewed research that shows that it gets really, really good results. One of the things that underpins the way that we work is we lift the lid on your brain and help you understand what's going on. And so we use neuroscience to guide the way that we work. So it's not pocket watch swinging, looking to the eyes, stuff that you might see on a comedy show or something like that. It's very much guided by research and science in the way that we work. But I suppose the main thing that I would say to somebody looking into hypnotherapy, and particularly solution-focused hypnotherapy, is it's a state of increased control rather than a state of loss of control. One of the big misconceptions is, are you going to get in my mind and tell me what to do? And I say to my clients that come to see me, and sometimes, people are struggling with anxiety, that they're going to might be worried about these things. I say, look, I won't make you do anything that you don't want to do. And even if I wanted to do that, which I don't, I couldn't anyway. In trance, in hypnosis, although your subconscious mind is doing the work, it's still there and it won't violate what you think is right and wrong. Even on stage hypnosis, people won't violate what's right and wrong. They will have they'll have a level of putting themselves out there that they're happy to do on a subconscious level. If I asked you to take out your bank card and give me your PIN number, you'd open your eyes and go, Brian's an idiot, and you'd walk straight out the room and go, I'm never coming back to see you.
Hopefully.
I could never make you do that. In state of hypnosis, though, what we can do is create a space where you can reevaluate some of your beliefs and make positive changes in line with what you want. And so if I'm offering suggestions in hypnosis, the person that sat in the chair behind me there gets to decide whether they take those on board. And they get to decide what those suggestions mean to them so that they can make positive changes and start to change their beliefs for themselves. But ultimately, I just offer the space to make those changes or offer the suggestions for them to make those changes. Ultimately, they decide whether they take those things on board or not. So actually, they get a huge level of increased control. So it's perfectly safe for them. I can understand why someone might go because of the misinformation. Oh, I feel a bit anxious about this. And often you can see it in the first session or two with somebody, they're a little bit more fidgety in the chair and, they're kind of occasionally, and I might even kind of half peek open and just go, what's going on here? And that's okay. That happens because, you're checking in, are you safe and everything. But one of the things I find is as we develop a trust together, and that's so important. You talked about that connection with your therapist. Actually, trust has been shown as the number one important factor in therapy, of all therapies. And once we develop that trust, then the client's able to kind of let go and they're able to kind of settle into the session much quicker. And I think one of the things that really helps in solution-focused hypnotherapy is we always start with an initial consultation where we find out about what your best hopes are for your work in our therapy sessions. And we lift the lid on the brain and we tell you what's going on. And actually and we explain how we're going to work with you. And that helps you to feel comfortable with us. I always say the initial consultation is as much for me to explain this stuff to the client as it is for the client to decide if they want to work with me. And it's absolutely fine if they don't, because it's really important. As I said, you've got to have that connection with your therapist and you've got to feel that they're the right therapist for you. And if you've got that, then your therapeutic work is going to be so much quicker and so much more efficient. And you're going to get better quicker as a result of that.
That's wonderful for people who have had any concerns about anxiety with hypnotherapy. I would just end this talking about the importance of finding somebody who is appropriately qualified and has insurance. So if you visit the AFSFH website, you can find a list of qualified hypnotherapists who are members, who all specialise in different things, including anxiety. And it's always a really good idea to go, like Brian said, and find somebody that you think can support you and work with you. Thank you so much for that, Brian. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. I'm hoping our listeners will agree with me on that one. And I will end our chat there.
Thank you. It's lovely to be on the podcast. Thanks again.